item on the agenda are the keynote speeches. As Jose said, the topic of the keynote today is uptake of research in policy and practice, the challenges and experience. The keynote will highlight the challenges and the experience with respect to the uptake of policy research in education, especially in the context of Maldives. And for this, I would like to invite Minister of State for Higher Education, Labour and Skills Development, Mr. Ahmed Shafil, to the stage now. State Minister.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Distinguished representatives from GPE, IDRC, and KIX EMAP, as well as the World Bank. My esteemed colleagues here, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to everyone. It is a privilege to address the gathering at the KIX Maldives National Uptake Forum. Our focus today is on the critical issue of integrating research into policy and practice, particularly in the context of educational policy development in our country, in Maldives. I've had the privilege, or perhaps even may have to take the blame for part of the shortcomings that we have had in terms of policy development through my long career in educational policy development in the Maldives. So it does give me a lot of pleasure to share this experience with you today. And I thank the Ministry of Education and also the KIX team for providing me with this wonderful opportunity. I'll start initially with the sort of practices that we have been having in terms of policy development. So if we are to look at current policy formulation practices, usually our in terms of policy development, predominantly we follow a top-down approach, which is characterized by often technocrats, like what we used to be, although now we do have to wear the political hat too. And it's often a one-way system. This method, however, often neglects the bottom-up approach, which involves listening to stakeholders and understanding the realities on the ground. In the context of development of educational policy, this process tends to be heavily politicized and swayed by government ideologies, and now more often we see directed through political party manifestos more than what we are talking about academic research or evidence-based. So consequently, it results in the lack of extensive consultations, dialogues, and the application of research-based evidence in shaping and executing policies. Going into the next step of how we have been doing things. So a lot of the times it has been on experimentation in educational policy. So as we go along in the process, again, going into practices in Maldives and perhaps in many countries in the region, educational policy often appears to be driven by experimentation and a trial and error methodology under the guise of reform. But since we are not basing it on evidence once again. This situation underscores the need for policymakers to revisit, rethink, and revise their approaches to policy formulation and implementation. To create more effective and inclusive educational policies, there must be a shift towards more participatory process that entangles the voices of all stakeholders and relies on robust evidence-based research. So there is certainly a need for us to build a culture of research and policy based on evidence. The same also goes to the practice, the implementation, where I would also have to address a bit. I'm required to do that as well. So if we are to address that, the implementation of policies is often conducted in silos by government agencies without strong monitoring and evaluation that is supposed to result after its implementation. And we don't see strong evaluation frameworks often attached with these policy implementation processes. Ad hoc policy development without proper consultations with larger stakeholders can create conflict among existing policies that are there. So alignment and understanding the policies across the landscape is also essential and important. In many cases, good policies sometimes die out during the implementation process, often due to hierarchical organizations, which can result in compromising the iterative dialogue and participatory space for genuine discussion, interaction, on this. We may have a lot of examples on that. And I think colleagues over here would know, especially about, I think, the most important and the most critical component of our policies, the curriculum within our schools. We borrowed many good practices from elsewhere in the world, and we are proud to say it is a curriculum that matches with the needs of today. But when, unfortunately, I don't think any one of us here are happy and satisfied. So likewise, there are many such examples that were, but in the process, the question is, have we involved research? Have we involved institutions like the universities and the colleges and the scholars around to participate in the process? So as I initially mentioned, often when it comes to policy, it is already set when governments come in. There are political pledges that are made, and often our policies have to fit into these pledges. The question is, are these pledges, are these commitments coming again based on any research or any evidence? So, but the reality on the ground is, when it comes to policy, it is now being sort of enforced or sort of guided through politics. So politics and education, of course, we can't separate it. And because politics is about meeting the needs of the people, of the voters, meeting the requests or demands that the public do make. So politics and education are indeed closely intertwined in the Maldivian context, and I guess that will be the same anywhere else in the world. Government decisions on the allocation of human resources, the appointment of key leaders to take on the policy initiatives, budget allocations, and the development of educational infrastructure significantly impact on the final outcomes of education. And as by educational stakeholders. So it guides future actions, and because the future cannot be adequately predicted, educational policies usually get characterized by uncertainties, requiring that they be written in more flexible manner to fit in and be able to adapt to whichever context that we do face while implementing this. So this comes, I think, to the question of the need and the requirement and the importance of evidence-based policy development, the reason why all of us are here today. So an evidence-informed policy with ground realities through constructive dialogue, discussions, and consultation is necessary to account for the voices of the stakeholders. By stakeholders, we mean everyone, almost everyone in a nation, starting with our youngsters who are attending school, parents, and all citizenry across. But when it comes to education, it is the stakeholders are more than those who even exist today. We have stakeholders that are yet to be born as well. It is essential that an evidence-informed policy with ground realities through a constructive dialogue, discussions, and consultation is necessary for us to hear the voices of everyone concerned. Education systems, but it is essential that we revisit and then try to engage and incorporate as much input from everyone who has an interest in our education system. So as policymakers and perhaps bureaucrats within our systems need to involve everyone, more so thought leaders, researchers in the process to get the views into it. So in terms of creating public policy, we know that there are 4 processes or key processes in creating such policies. We need to set the agenda, which is again based on requirements. We need to understand the ground realities. What are the demands that we have? So it comes in. And then, of course, based on or understanding this, after gathering this evidence, we formulate the policies with, of course, with appropriate legal procedures that need to be also in place. And we go into implementation. And what then, however, lacks is again something related to the research that we have to do, monitoring and evaluation, which has to be part of it. So after the earlier 3 processes, the first process also starts with research and evidence, and the final process also is about research and evidence. Then only we will be able to go into the next cycle of policy improvement and formulation. So agenda setting in the start of the process, followed by data collection on key issues through dialogue, consultations, discussions, and analysis. So these are processes that follow through. And this is again followed by implementation with the appropriate legal procedures. During the implementation, assess the effectiveness, which lead to further policy adjustments that are often required. So these are all challenges that we have, perhaps in terms of the way that we look at policy and in terms of the way we need to set the mindsets. This comes to establishing cultures of evidence-based research. And I am happy to see that we are gradually in the Maldives, at least starting with our educational institutions, higher educational institutions. There is a glimpse of hope that already there are research interests coming in. But what is still lacking is policies that are coming in, its implementation process, and how the academia, in fact, links with the process. So our education system is, as I mentioned earlier, driven by political motives. And again, this is not unique to the Maldives. This is the reality anywhere in the world with a top-down approach. Reform the education system has, some of it has succeeded and some might not have, in areas we may not have seen the fruits of it yet being born. So some can be failed due to lack of clear shared goals, objectives, and sometimes even lack of resources coupled with poor implementation support. The ground realities have to be considered while formulating our policies in the education system. So participation is the key. Participation, all especially scholars and researchers who would be able to address to this from an independent, separated group from the policymakers. So with the participatory policy formulation and use of research evidence, education development will be marred by chaos and conflicts of able to probably attend to it. So as we all know, education is a public good that requires collective and shared responsibility to prepare our students nationally rooted and globally competent. Working with knowledge, skills, values, consensus, which lead to better policy formulation and better reforms in our education system. We do require a clear vision to create a robust education system which fits in to our ground realities, into our context, and policy makers and bureaucrats who are involved in the policy development process need to be guided in the right direction. In conclusion, to ensure the success of education policies and reforms in the Maldives, we must prioritize an evidence-based participatory approach. This involves extensive consultation, robust research, and collaboration among all stakeholders. Doing so, we can create opportunities for all to succeed, leading to increased well-being and equity within our society. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion and insight that will emerge from this forum. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, State Minister, for your insightful. It has definitely taken us a bit closer towards achieving to the practice, on us a different lens and perspective through which we can focus on policy formulation and uptake supported by research and evidence. And now I invite Dr. Rasha Sharaf, KIX EMAP Knowledge Lead South Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa for her keynote address. Rasha.
Well, first of all, it is my great pleasure to be with you here today after working for years with the Maldives national team. And now we are reaping, I mean, what we've been working on and cultivating for a number of years. All right. So I would have 20 minutes, so I would try to be prompt. We're on a schedule so far, so I would try to be prompt. I would be first sharing the map of the Maldives because it's very significant. That's a simplified map. I mean, it does not show the 200 plus islands, which is a real challenge that people are facing while providing equitable education across the board. Then I would have my research question, which is, what are the approaches to policy reform in the Maldives? How are people, because I'm like representing an external viewer to the whatever is happening, how are people in the Maldives are carrying on and conducting policy change, policy reform? And in this, I have like served all possible, theories of change and trying to figure out which one of them would fit most to the Maldives. The first thing is that those are like a number of, I mean, the theories of change are many, but I've selected the four for more relevant. The first is cultural theory. There is also the social organization theory, the cognitive theory, the political theory, and the institutional theory. If we look at this political theory, what does it say? It says acknowledging power dynamics. This theory views reform as political processes. It considers how stakeholders negotiate interest, influence decision-making, and shaping policy implementations. How are teachers managing their rights? How are parents guaranteeing quality education? How is the ministry looking into reforms, and so on? If you look at the institutional theory, it looks at such as like school ministers, any organizations. They look at they play a crucial role in examining formal, informal rules impact policy implementation and change. So if, for example, the country would launch a national curriculum, how would schools perceive this national curriculum and implement it? We would also look at the social cognition theory that emphasizes the individual beliefs and attitudes and social interactions. Change occurs when individuals perceive the need for it and actively participate in the process. And this reiterates what Dr. Ahmed Shafour has been mentioning in his keynote speech: participation and involvement of different stakeholders. And fourth theory is the cultural theory. It recognizes importance of culture, context, and it suggests that successful reforms align with existing cultural norms and values. So if we would look at those four theories closer, having a closer look at them, how do they affect education reform in the Maldives and in relation to the GPE, the KIX work in the country? If you look at the cultural theory, we have here the diagram that shows the theory of change, the approach of the KIX. There are like three layers. The first one is the sphere of control, where we have all control. We come to the forum, we have a webinar, we have a learning cycle. Those are like within the sphere of control. But if you go to a more a wider scope, which is the sphere of influence, and then to the sphere of interest where we have impact, real impact on education system. Those are all, you'd find all the keywords talking about national teams, national experts, national organizations. So if we really want to take policy options and policy reform into the spheres of influence and interest, it's not KIX, it's not GPE, it's not IDRC, it's you as national organizations and national key stakeholders working within the field of education in the country. So both spheres of influence and spheres of interest depend on national teams and experts who are most capable of aligning. And the word aligning is like has been repetitively used in the morning by the minister and by the welcome speakers. So with existing cultural norms, preserving your cultural norms and values, avoiding alienation of reform. We don't want a reform that would be brought, would not fit within the Maldives context. If you look also at the social cognition theory, we have here, I've used here, Aminat is here with us, I've used her term fashi-ashi. Now I can speak Devi, right? So fashi-ashi is a term that is belongs to your own language, and that would talk about how you plan to scale up teacher capacity development. So fashi-ashi, which is a KIX EMAP Learning Cycle 5 knowledge program example, where a local model is adopted for the development at a scale leading to 2 GPE grants to achieve policy priority areas, equity and inclusion. And the two actions are one to develop teacher capacity for equity and inclusion, and the other is strengthening center capacity and resources for curriculum implementation. So again, you have digested the tools with your own approach and with your own cultural norms. If you move on to the political theory, where like a ministry is taking the lead, when the government decides to take the lead on providing equitable access to all atolls for higher secondary education, or for higher secondary schools, based on the recommendation of the Learning Cycle 3 that has been produced by local authors like yourself, data in educational planning. So that's as well an exemplification of how political theory work in action, because we keep like teaching people in academia and in research, those are the theories, but how they are into action. And last but not least, when I talk about institutional theory, I have seen that NIE was a real example, all right? They took the lead on integrating the 21st century skills into the national competency-based curriculum. They have their own competency-based curriculum with the 8 strands and components, including classroom practices based on the Learning Cycle 2 National Knowledge Report. So this was followed by a rapid customized country support mechanism that is used for providing capacity strengthening for all NIE staff across the board, the 58 education professional staff in NIE. And they said, we have provided a Zoom link. No, we don't use Zoom link. We use Google Meet. Okay, I mean, do it your own way. All right. So training times based on their work schedules. We need this timing because people leave and people have classrooms and so on. So, you are trying to impose even the way that you want to receive the capacity strengthening activity taking place, as well, writing yourself your own RCCS reports and guides for teachers. Speaking up for more policy alignments and inter-country exchange, like we had a meeting yesterday and more are coming into the pipeline for STEM education, for open education resources in collaboration, like the project that Villa College is leading, and assessments and much, much more. And the ball keeps rolling. So, but how could this be sustained and scaled up? And that is the real challenge now. Experts and organizations, and they come and provide support to us, but how do we continue our journey? So we're also in KIX believing in systemic approach, where all the pieces of the puzzle, they come together to form a whole body and a whole education system. So it's far more difficult than piecemeal reforms. We want to avoid the piecemeal reforms, a bit here and a bit there, and they are not compatible with each other. They are not fitting together. They are not aligned. We are more for the systemic kind of approach for policy reform. And those are like some of the examples, and like a prescription, a guidebook on how those elements could be integrated in the systemic approach to policy reform. So we have more to do and more to be working on in the future. So a systemic thinking approach can improve the effectiveness of educational reform by guiding decision makers, researchers, and practitioners towards implementing reform more effectively. And this is what we're looking for. And I'm using here our an example by Gita Steiner-Khamsi, our lead researcher in KIX EMAP Hub, on a systemic transformation approach for curriculum, only for curriculum. So all of those components should be taken into consideration. Oh, all right. I've been moving here, but not here. All right. So I'm sorry, those are like the descriptions of what I've been like doing, yeah, and talking about. Yes, we're here. Yeah. So a system transformation approach, like here, if we talk about a curriculum reform strategy, so I mean, we should not forget that there is a new 21st century skills curriculum framework is available, new aligned criteria for teacher promotion and remuneration, compensation, motivation, new aligned curriculum reform for in-service and pre-service teacher education, so School of Education in Villa Colleges, School of Education in MNU, and so on. New aligned textbooks and teaching and learning materials to be taken into consideration. Instructional support and leadership at school level. Aligned student assessment methods and tools, as well as standards for each grade and each subject. I mean, so we need to take this into consideration as to reach a full implementation of the curriculum. This is an example of what we mean by a systemic approach to education reform. So we also need to rely on evidence-based approaches, and this is what KIX research is doing, and knowledge projects, successful education reform, rely on evidence-based practices like KIX research, National Research Council that is being now cooked into the ministry, research funds that might be available for teachers and for researchers, teacher professional development, digital transformation, including artificial intelligence, use of education information system, and alignment with broader cycle. So that is what we mean by when we think of evidence-based approaches to education policy reform. Also, data is really important. And we have here today a whole session about data, spatial data, MS, and other data tools that would enable genuine reform to take place. So data-driven decision-making is really important to establish data systems like MS that track students' progress, teacher effectiveness, and school performance, to regularly review this data to adjust the policies as needed. All right. And also beware of the voltage drop. Voltage drop, what is it? Are you aware of, are you acquainted with this term, voltage drop? Because when implementing a scale, to go at a scale, there's often a voltage drop. The momentum is less. Interventions that succeed in small scale pilots may yield lower impacts when scaled up on a level. Why is not? Yeah. Thank you, Jose Luis. All right. So to be able to sustain reforms, we need to consider how the entire system, not only on a small pilot scope. And in this, I would really invite you to have a look at a knowledge report that was produced by the Learning Cycle 5 on scaling up teacher professional development. And we have here authors are among the audience today, as well as the World Bank report on making teacher policy work. They have good like recipes on how to get scaling up succeed with the same momentum of the piloting phase. Shukriya. That's all I see.